Hello chess friends and welcome to your Out of Chess channel and welcome to the day 3 of the FIDE World Fischer Random Chess Championship in 2022. So we're following now the derby of the day, which is of course the beautiful match between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. They already played in the group stage so far, in which we have to say it, Magnus Carlsen I think a little bit outplayed Hikaru Nakamura, but then eventually blundered and lost his first 2 games against Hikaru. Now let's see what happened. We're starting immediately with the first game of their 2 match games. In my opinion, it was an incredible game, really a sharp tactical battle with great opportunities, also inaccuracies, blunders, mistakes, which we love to see, of course, because when that happens, then we have really tactical clash, a really brilliant tactical battle. So let's see now the game. So this was the starting position, and Magnus pulled off a really interesting idea in the first move, h4. Okay, this is not normal chess, this is Fischerrandom chess. In my opinion, it's not so bad that Magnus Carlsen pulled off this h4 move, because we have to say this pawn is supported by the rook, and still we can launch a flank attack, because in Fischerrandom you have of course the flexibility to castle queenside, castle kingside, so h4 perfectly fine. But h5 also by Hikaru Nakamura, so they're playing already a really brilliant opening line. So here in the continuation we have d4, we have b5, and now Magnus breaks again the center here a little bit. With the move c4, he's trying to create a really unbalanced pawn structure, and he's again playing the pawn move that's supported by the rook, which makes in the beginning really sense, because the rooks of course are very good behind the pawn, so far good opening strategy sort of in this particular position. Now Hikaru does the same. We have here c5, c takes b5, and now we have also c takes d4, and you see now the pawn structure gets a little bit unbalanced, but I think we have to say many things already about the pawn structure. From a middle game's perspective, here black should be better, because black has always the opportunity to launch here a central pawn storm, and when you have many pieces on the board, then of course it's much better to have your pawns in the center, because the pawns can always restrict the minor piece activity. From an endgame's perspective, it's much better, I think, to have this outside pass pawn, so like Magnus has here. For instance, if the game now reaches the endgame stage, then white should be better. If you could just imagine this position without maybe rooks, minor pieces, without the queens on the board, then of course you can create a distant pass pawn here, so from white's perspective. So as I said, it's really unbalanced from middle games now perspective. Black should be better, and now Hikaru has to use now his central pawn storm here. So we have a rook to c8, queen to c8, b3, attacking now the centralized pawn on d4, bishop to b6, and now knight to f3, played by Magnus, continuing the pressure around the square d4. Now Hikaru plays the beautiful trap, plays now this beautiful battery on light course, and he's targeting now the g2. If you of course take something, or bishop to d4, let's see this line, bishop to d4, knight to d4, then you get checkmated here on g2. Really wild stuff, so tricky Hikaru here. So that's why Magnus didn't continue the pressure, he played now simply the move a4. a4 makes really sense, because you have an advantage there. Here I think we should not so care much so about computer evaluations. I think you have to stuck now into your strategy. Now Magnus is trying of course here to play b4, maybe a5 and similar stuff, creating here this 3 versus pawn majority attack on the queen side. So we have now e5. Hikaru does the same. He has now the beautiful central control. We have now e3. Magnus breaks now the center, and now after d takes e3, knight to e3, here comes f6 by Hikaru Nakamura, and this is quite risky what Hikaru did. I think here it was really unnecessary maybe to play this move that weakens a little bit here your pawn structure in front of the king. Maybe d6 does the same, but at least the king is more secure, and still we have to say the knight on e8 is controlling the d6. So okay, you have a backward pawn, but at least this pawn is holding the position without weakening the pawn structure in front of the king. But as I said, nothing lost. I'm just saying maybe this was a slightly risky move here by Hikaru Nakamura. So we have now b4. Magnus is again playing on his plan, knight to e6, bishop to b3. So see how bad it was in the beginning to play the move f6 in the first place, really unnecessary. Now Hikaru Nakamura is facing many tactical problems, although this is still an equal position, but it was really unnecessary. So knight to c7 played by Hikaru. Maybe it was also time here to play bishop to e3, f takes e3. At least you know where to attack now. At least you're attacking now the pawn. And for instance, there is now really brutal stockfish line. I would never come up with this kind of a stuff by myself. I wanted to show how, for instance, the stockfish engine calculates this position. Now stockfish suggests, for instance, this really wild line with the move queen to d3, allowing here the fork on e4. And now white continues with queen to d7. You're allowing here also the move queen to e3, pardon me, to take out the pawn. But now after king to h2, also the knight is hanging here. This one is also hanging, so this would be really brutal chess. Now, for instance, you pick up the bishop, and now we play knight to d4, sort of a fork. You have to take, and now we pick up here also the knight on e8, and now after a couple of checks, we can also pick up here the knight on d4. So this would be maybe a drawish line, but here this was really brutal. How, for instance, the engine calculates this position. After moving bishop to b3 here, knight to c7 was played by Hikaru Nakamura, so he tried to stay with this active bishop pair on both of these diagonals, which also makes sense in my opinion. Now the bishops are lined up against a white king, really wild stuff. So now Magnus uses this weakness that actually Hikaru Nakamura created, knight to f5, and look at this. From this square, the knight has very nice activities. What we're trying to do maybe is get the queen somehow. If the queen, for instance, comes on g3, or maybe the rook comes on g3, then you could have really huge problems around the square g7. So now Hikaru makes a huge blunder. He plays now the move knight to e8, and he retreats again with the knight. Here he has to go and simplify the game with the move queen to e4. He should not tolerate this knight. He should not tolerate the queen's activity on this diagonal. He should not tolerate this light square problems that he has now in the position. He has to now slow down the pace of the game and simply trade off the queens. But he played knight to e8, allows now here Magnus Carlsen to play an annoying check, knight to e7, and now after move king to f7, now Magnus had a brilliant opportunity which he unfortunately missed. He played now the move knight to g6, but maybe you can pause the video just for fun and try to see now really the best continuation here for white. It's really wild what Magnus Carlsen had here as an opportunity. So as I said, try to see the continuation. Really brutal position it is, really tactical rich position. Okay, here a brilliant move would have been knight to c6, locking now this diagonal. And now, for instance, if you take d takes c6, now the queen comes finally into the game. And look at this now. The serious threat is now knight to e5, and also we have to say the knight on e6 is hanging. So you could do now maybe knight to c7, but you pick up simply the pawn here, knight to e5. You have to step back. Look at this now. The whole position is falling apart. Knight to c6, and the game is over. So here after move queen to f5, what you could do is maybe queen to e7, controlling further the position, getting the queen into the defense. But again, knight to e5, you have to now step back from the defense of the knight, and here you simply pick up with bishop to e6 or queen to e6, whatever you want to do, and we will eventually also take out the pawn on c6 here. So it's simply a lost game. So it was really almost game over for Hikaru Nakamura, but unfortunately for the beauty of the game, here Magnus Carlsen pulled off now knight to g6. Still nothing lost for Magnus Carlsen, but he had really the chance maybe to seal the fate here in the game. So here rook to h6, attacking now the rook. Now again Magnus plays this idea, queen to f5, again with the idea to play knight to e5, so you cannot take off, of course, here the move the knight on g6. You get simply knight to e5 and we'll pick up the rook. So here in the continuation, Hikaru Nakamura played knight to d6. Now we have knight to e5, again with the same idea. You cannot take out the knight, you have to step back, and here Hikaru Nakamura played king to d8. So this is now almost an equal position, because okay, the knight is still endangered, but at least Hikaru Nakamura escaped now from this mess, and is hoping to get rid of really all of this tactical battle. So after king to e8, Magnus Carlsen's knight is of course still hanging, so Magnus tried the counter-attack, queen to d3, attacking the knight on d6, but Hikaru played here really the correct move, gets all of the range now, and of course continues the pressure against the weak f2 pawn. So here black is better, although the king is still stuck in the center, but this is not a good position now anymore for Magnus Carlsen. Hikaru Nakamura regrouped and has now also good chances, of course, on this diagonal. So we have now kingside castling by Magnus Carlsen. There's nothing that can be done, of course. Knight to c4, if you try to escape bishop to f2, knight to f2 is going to happen. So you have to castle, you have to cut out of the attack. But now Hikaru simply picks up the piece and has now a situation where he's up a whole knight. So here in the continuation, what you do from the white perspective, Magnus Carlsen continues with bishop to e5. We have rook to g6 by Hikaru, continuing now the pressure. Look at this setup. The bishop is lined up with the queen on this diagonal. We have a perfect battery. The bishop is also lined up on this diagonal. Still the knight is centralized on e4, so it's a really brilliant attacking formation. So in the continuation, Magnus continues with his plan a5. Here Hikaru retreats to c7. Actually, there is also a cool line, a rook to g4, that Hikaru could have played. This would be quite interesting, because here after move a takes b6, you have this opportunity. Knight to d2 is a really nice tactical shot, because of course, look at this, everything is simply coordinated towards the g2 square. So this will be really unpleasant for Magnus Carlsen to handle. But here after move a5, here Hikaru stays with the piece on the game. We have now a6 kicking with the queen, queen to b6, and now after move bishop to d5, bishop to d5 play by Hikaru. We have queen to d5, and now here Hikaru again regroups, which is I think also a good idea. Now he has at least a compact position. Now he has to play, of course, a couple of defensive moves. He has to regroup, he has to get the king on a better square, he has to get out of the range, but if he of course plays now the game correctly, this should be, in my opinion, here a winning game for black. But okay, here Magnus continues with queen to a8. So Magnus is playing now the only moves that are possible. If Magnus plays only one inaccurate move, I think the game could be over. Here king to e7, we have rook to e1, lining up the rook where already the king, so if something gets cleared, of course the king could be endangered. So pardon me. Here the continuation, rook to g4 played by Hikaru, bishop to c7, queen to c7, and now knight to e5 by Magnus Carlsen. And this was a seemingly nice attacking move, but here you have to, I think, simplify the game with queen to b7. This would be the way to go, because black can never take out the queen, because then this pass pawn is very annoying. If of course rook to c4 happens, then we have this one, knight to d4. Look at this, you cannot take out the knight here with the rook, because the rook is connected to the queen, and you can also cannot also take out the knight here with the knight on e6. So this is now the main issue, and I think with this setup, with this attacking formation, of course white could have also good chances. But okay, here Magnus pulled off knight to e5. We have queen to c3 by Hikaru Nakamura, attacking now the pawn, the rook, and also the knight on e5. We have king to f1 by Magnus Carlsen, and now queen to b4 here by Hikaru Nakamura. We have knight to g4, knight takes g4, and we have now an endgame where Hikaru Nakamura has two knights against the rook, but actually this rook on e1 is a little bit misplaced. Of course the king is always stuck to the defense here of the rook on e1. Now the serious threat is of course knight to f2, and now Magnus Carlsen has again two choices. He can of course go with the move queen to a7 that he played. Of course he wants to take out the pawn, he wants to create two connected pass pawns, which could be very dangerous. But actually this was now his main mistake. The main move that Magnus missed here is the move rook to e6. First of all, what this move is doing is of course creates further weaknesses around the king. When that happens, if you take now with the move d takes e6, you can always, I think, deliver a couple of annoying checks. So the king is now opened. Now it's as simple as that. We can always create some threats, and now maybe here you can take out with the move queen takes a7, but it comes with a check. That's, I think, a huge difference in this scenario that Magnus played queen to a7. Now Hikaru plays immediately. You see this move doesn't come with the check. Hikaru has now an extra tempo, sort of. Magnus Carlsen has to step back from the defense of the rook. We have queen to e1. Okay, Magnus can of course take out now also here the knight on h2, but this is not the same position anymore. Now the knight is still here on e6, and the knight is actually the best piece that can defend, I think, the king. So that's why this should be, if again black plays now the game correctly, this should be a winning endgame. Of course Magnus Carlsen has these two connected pass pawns, but still, as I said, there are many checks that can be played. This knight can be included in the near future also into the attack, so it's really now bad game for Magnus. So we have now queen to e5, g3. We have now queen to b5. You see here Hikaru picks up one pawn. Now they're not two connected pass pawns. Now this is only one pass pawn, so it's not so good anymore here from Magnus. We have queen to b7. What of course Magnus is hoping for is that Hikaru takes, a takes b7, and you see now the knight cannot catch up, of course, with the pawn anymore. So of course Hikaru is not falling for this. Plays now queen to c5. Very nice move with a direct target here on f2. So we have now king to g1, queen to c1 by Hikaru Nakamura, king to h2, and now queen to c7. This is a beautiful move by Hikaru Nakamura. Of course, if you take now queen to c7, knight to c7 is going to happen, and now you're stopping the further progress of the pawn, and this is completely winning. So that's why after move queen to c7, we have queen to b4 by Magnus Carlsen. Now Hikaru Nakamura simply escapes here to e8. So after king to e8, now Magnus Carlsen plays a queen to b5. This is now his only chance. The only chance to make a draw or maybe even win the game is of course to get rid of these two pawns. So somehow to attack them, somehow to grab them, maybe deflecting many pieces of black that could be coordinated of course towards the queen side. When black takes out the pawn on a6, then you can meanwhile take at least one of these pawns. After queen to b5, Hikaru Nakamura makes now maybe the crucial mistake in the endgame. He plays now the move g6, but this is really hard to see, of course. No one can calculate this kind of an endgame like this. After move g6, okay, here you're protecting the pawn, but now the main issue is this move, queen to d3, and there's not a good way anymore to protect the pawn. Here you can bring king to f7, but now with queen to f3 there are always some check possibilities. King to g7, again queen to e3 could be possibility to simply trying to maybe advance the pawn. Look at this, the cool move, instead of this move g6 that Hikaru Nakamura should have played, is actually king to d8, leaving actually this pawn hanging. This is now really wild idea. I'm not sure, as I said, how many of us would play this move. Queen to h5, leaving simply the pawn hanging, but actually now with the queen to b6 targeting the f2, now for instance black, pardon me, white has to protect the pawn with the move queen to e2, and now it just play queen to c7. Look at this. The problem is now white cannot attack the pawn on g7. You're staying with your g7 on the board. That's now the main issue. Here in the continuation you could maybe try queen to d2 with ideas of queen to g5, but now you just pick up the pawn. If queen to g5 happens, now it play queen to f6, you still can cover, and now after queen to f6, e takes f6, g takes f6, pardon me, you have still okay a good protection here on the king side. Okay, you still have to battle against this passer on the h file, but still black is also now at pass pawn, and with the support of the knight, of course, this could be a completely winning endgame for black. But here after move g6 that Hikaru played, Magnus attacked simply the pawn with queen to d3. Again Hikaru counterplays here on f2. We have now queen to g6 comes with the check. That's now the main issue. And after king to e7, here Hikaru got again challenged with this move. King to g1 was played by Magnus Carlsen. You see now, okay, you can take out this one, but Magnus picks up now another pawn. This was really unnecessary. In this previous scenario, Hikaru Nakamura had still one pawn that could battle on the king side a little bit. Now after move queen to h5, queen to a1, okay, you can play a couple of checks, but now Magnus Carlsen just starts to push the pawns here, and these are three connected pass pawns, so you cannot stop all of them. You have to now accept perpetual checks by Magnus Carlsen. So after move h5, we have queen to g7, f4, we have now d5, queen to h3, d4, queen to d5 here by Magnus Carlsen. Here Hikaru tries to keep everything glued together, compact, but the problem is now you cannot advance the pawn. If you do that, you lose probably the pawn. If you try, of course, to somehow play with your king towards the center, you always risk some checks and even some perpetuals. You still have some worries with this three connected pass pawn. So in my opinion, of course, a drawish position. So here in the continuation, king to g4, we have king to f8, here king to f3, king to e4, we have king to h6, king to d3. You see Hikaru is keeping the knight here on e6, that at least is protecting, of course, the pawn on d4. We have queen to e5, we have queen to a3, king to e2. Now a couple of checks by Hikaru, but as I said, you can only do perpetuals. Also white can only do perpetuals. We have king to f3, queen to c6, again queen to g4, king to h7, now queen to f5. Okay, you can do your checks from white's perspective, but you don't have support. The king cannot be included, of course, in the attack. You cannot just rush with your pawns, because okay, white king is also endangered here on g4. So as I said, nothing can be played. King to f6, we have here a couple of checks, king to h8, and here after a couple of perpetuals, both of them agree to a draw. So what you say, great but wild game. We have seen Magnus Carlsen at the beginning really nice tactical shot with the move knight to c6. Then Hikaru took over, had also some great chances in the middle game stage. Eventually he missed also here potential win in the end game, but this is really brutal chess, so this is not normal. So many ups and downs, like a roller coaster. This game was really, in my opinion, a deserved draw when we watch now the whole game. Okay, Hikaru Nakamura should have probably won this game in the end, but still, of course, also great defensive performance by Magnus Carlsen. He found basically the only moves in the end that prolonged the game somehow and managed to get the draw here. So great game. We'll see also probably this other game. They're playing another game where Hikaru Nakamura has now the white pieces and Magnus Carlsen has the black pieces. This will be also probably incredible wild tactical battle. If you want to see some other games that we have covered so far, check out also my coverage of some other great games. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos. And what you say, chess is the best, of course.